You'd think that Christopher Nolan directing an adaptation of Homer's The Odyssey would be cause for excitement, but the online conversation surrounding this movie has been anything but positive. Whether it's criticisms about the historically inaccurate armors or the use of modern language in a story set centuries ago, many have taken issue with the casting of transgender actor Elliot Page in the role of Achilles, which is bizarre since he plays a completely different character, while others have taken issue with the casting of a black actress, Lupita Nyong'o, in the role of Helen of Troy, the face that launched 1,000 ships. But whether the complaints are creative or personal in nature, all the criticisms emerge from the same place. People have preconceived notions of what the Odyssey should look like, and they're disappointed that Christopher Nolan didn't validate their expectations of this material. At this point in his career, Christopher Nolan can do whatever the hell he wants. And if he wanted to, he could have made a way more traditional version of the Odyssey. One with gleaming golden costumes, one where Helen of Troy is the blonde-haired, blue-eyed, Eurocentric image of beauty that we all expect. And I would argue the critics and the conservatives got one thing right. That would have made for a much more faithful adaptation of the source material. And I would argue it would also make for a much worse, far less interesting film. If you go into the Odyssey expecting it to adhere to the images you've created in your head, you will be very disappointed. Because this is not the Odyssey, this is Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey. One in which the director infuses the classical source material with his singular creative voice. Ever since his Batman trilogy, Nolan has established himself as a filmmaker who takes the fantastical and grounds it in reality. He's not interested in bringing an archetypal Joker to the big screen, he's interested in asking, if the Joker were real, what would that actually look like? He's not the filmmaker who's interested in sitting in a studio and creating a computer-generated set piece. He's interested in crashing an airplane for real. And that's the approach he takes to adapting Homer's fantasy epic. The characters don't speak in ancient English, and that's because Nolan wants to create a version of the Odyssey that feels grounded in our reality. The characters don't dress in gold armor because Nolan is interested in creating an armor that feels grounded in our reality. In an interview, Nolan said that audiences want to go on a journey, but they also want to believe. Give them a reason to believe. And that's exactly what Nolan delivers. Once a giant, horrific Cyclops appears about 30 minutes into the movie, you just don't question it. Because instead of using CGI, Nolan builds this giant through practical effects. And when you look up at the screen and see this giant, you believe it's actually there. It is a much more grounded, humane version of the Cyclops than what we all pictured reading the book, but it is undoubtedly Christopher Nolan's Cyclops. And that, to me, is the essence of what makes a great book-to-movie adaptation. Zack Snyder's Watchmen is the most faithful book-to-movie adaptation you could ask for. In fact, the graphic novel was used as the storyboard for Snyder's film. The graphic novel is arguably the greatest comic book of all time, so it stands to reason that a movie, which is essentially a one-to-one adaptation, would be one of the greatest comic book movies ever made. Yet, it wasn't. And while Zack Snyder's Watchmen is a faithful adaptation, it's also a bad one. The idea of creating a one-to-one adaptation is an admirable one, but in doing so, Snyder fails to breathe life into any of the images. It's an approach that leads to imitation, not adaptation. He fails to justify his movie as anything other than an inferior version of the book. I felt the same way about Wes Anderson's recent Roald Dahl adaptations, in which he literally has the actors read, word for word, the narration of the original books. And instead of finding it satisfying, I found myself asking, wait, why should I not just read Roald Dahl's original books instead? Had Nolan taken a similar approach to Wes Anderson, it would have resulted in a much more faithful adaptation of the Odyssey, but I would have been scratching my head thinking, what's the the point? Where's the creativity in grabbing a classic piece of literature off the shelf and filming it in the most generic way possible? What's so interesting about presenting an image of Helen of Troy that ChatGPT could have produced in seconds? The answer is nothing. Instead, the Odyssey honors its source material by offering a unique interpretation. Nolan takes big swings here, including scenes and twists that aren't in the book, completely recontextualizing major characters and defining events. Instead of repeating all the same themes as the source material, he reframes the Odyssey as a narrative of guilt and the corrosive nature of war. Yes, the Odyssey is the first movie to be filmed entirely on IMAX. Yes, the Odyssey is a colossal epic featuring set piece after set piece, and each of these taglines would have been enough for this to be an entertaining cinema experience. But this movie's greatest accomplishment is its willingness to do what all great movie-to-book adaptations should: offer us a sincere reimagining. And in an era where companies want to convince us that their AI models are a substitute for individual creativity, this movie's singular, unique voice is a rallying cry for individuality. ChatGPT would have never told Christopher Nolan to cast a black actress as Helen of Troy, or to kick off his movie with Travis Scott as a bard, but he made each of these idiosyncratic, unexpected decisions himself, and this movie is all the better and all the more human because of it. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for weekly TV and movie reviews. And if you've had the chance to watch the Odyssey, hop in the comments and let us know what you thought about it. I am Cinemike, and I'll see you next time.